committee meeting of the Sioux Falls City Council on the 21st of January. Excuse me, it's 21st of January. Let's see, looks like there's a present. And our first order of business is the approval of minutes of the
Move to approve. Second, Anderson. Aye.
Aye.
Our first agenda item today is information, the Prairie Meadows subdivision annexation. Judge, can I believe it's going to be the presenter, or not sure who? I see you discussing it. Oh. They seem to be discussing it, so whoever is ready to give that presentation, we'd love to have you start. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you. Jeffrey Schmidt representing planning staff this afternoon. There's a team here of directors and staff that has been working on the annexation for subdivisions for a couple of years now. As commission know, or city council members know, we've been dealing with approximately 50 subdivisions out there that are in our growth area for quite some time. And these developments, that some of them are rural subdivisions that have housing subdivisions in them, and some of them are vacant properties. But as we continue to have dialogues with these property owners out there, we're trying to come up with solutions and ideas for how they can have an understanding of coming into the city of Sioux Falls and how we can address their comments and concerns. At the same time, there's a general philosophy that properties that are in our growth area at some time should be in city limits. So last summer, we came before Land Use Committee and gave an overview of our annexation program and the 50 subdivisions that we had. And then in fall, we gave an overview of 2 or 3 that we were really kind of looking at getting completed and getting done. The one that we were focusing on at that time was Prairie Meadows. Prairie Meadows is on the west side of Sioux Falls. It's at 41st and Tealis Road. And when we were there in the fall, or in front of land use in the fall, there were some questions that we had proposed to this body in regards to whether we should go forward with the annexation resolution, funding that proposal for annexation, and in regards to the term limits and the rate for that. At that time, the council land use committee asked us to kind of go back and look at some of those things, and the team's kind of done that over time. So again, in regards to Prairie Meadows, they have 70 to 75 properties out there. The majority of them have single-family homes on them. They've been in existence since the 1960s, 1970s out on the west side of town. They have a sanitary sewer district. They currently have their sanitary sewer being improved and worked on through the city of Sioux Falls. They received a DNR consolidated grant for some of their funding to help get that improved. To completely bring that project up to code, it would be $1.3 million to do that. Of that project, they received $900,000, and they still have a $500,000 loan that they could receive. So sanitary sewer is the one aspect that they've been able to receive some funding for to get their sanitary sewer system taken care of. So that's a project that they're currently working on, and they've had some direct help with Stockwells and Southeastern Council of Governments to receive that support. They also have looked at their water distribution system, their stormwater system, and then their streets project. Again, from a city standpoint, we would recommend that they do all of it and do it concurrently, because it's very challenging to go in and do it piecemeal. To be able to go into a subdivision or go into an area and do sanitary sewer one year and then come in the following year and do water, it just continually disrupts the property owners as well as that road base or that area. So it makes sense to do it all at once. But again, those are discussions that those property owners would have to do, because it would be their project and they would really be contracting it. When we have had some water cost estimates done. It's the water is around $900,000 to complete their water system. Their stormwater system would be their storm drainage for snow melt and for rainfall events. That would be $700,000. And their street system to improve that with, currently they're on gravel roads, to get a hard surface curb and gutter system would be $800,000. So all in all, it's about a $3.5 million project to bring them up to city standards. Again, we've continued to look at different options to assist them in doing that. And again, the city's kind of worked on that over these last couple of months, and we're still trying to come up with some solutions and trying to bring those out to the neighbors on what they can do and how they can do it. So we're still trying to come up with some options to make sure that we can address their concerns as well as the city's concerns.
Any discussion? Go ahead, Councilor Karski.
I guess this isn't the entire extent of the presentation, is it, on this deal? Or we've got a lot of notes here. What else are we going to be talking about here?
I'm wondering from your standpoint how much you'd want to go into the details of the project. Because at this point, again, they're still kind of draft, and I didn't know the details that you'd wanted to go into at the Land Use Committee.
Question, if
Keep
I
going.
may. Is time running out on this? Are we up against a deadline to get this done by a certain date because of state funding, money on the sewer, that type of thing?
No. The state funding has a time limit. They can continue with that state funding as well as they can ask for an extension. The timeline's pretty, we're setting that ourselves. Number one, we'd like to get it coordinated with our 41st Street project. At the same time, there's a direction from council, or we're looking for direction from council on, do you want to annex these properties? Or, as we've heard, other direction, do you not want to annex the properties and have the costs? So that's one of the first things I'm looking for is, do you go forward with annexation and costs, or is the cost so prohibitive that you just say, no, we can't have this burden and don't do the costs and don't do the annexations?
Two options, forced annexation or voluntary.
Yes, sir.
Are we waiting for voluntary? Have we been asked to do this at all? Where are we at on that portion?
Currently, right now, our recommendation would be that we would request that they would voluntarily come in, because that would be more associated with the funding proposals. If they voluntarily came in, they had 75% property owners requesting to come in, then we would be able to come back to City Council and say they want to annex and they want to pay for this sewer system. They want to pay for their improvements. If we force them to come in, it'd be a different situation. How would you pay for their improvements, and how is the City of Sioux Falls or the neighbors going to pay for $3.5 million of improvements?
If I can continue.
Yes, you may.
Sure. Have we gone to this association, this neighborhood, with a proposal saying we haven't?
No.
Okay. Do we have plans to do so? Or is that up to us to give you that direction?
I believe it's up to council to give us some direction. I don't know if it's the direction, but give us some direction. A lot of it comes down to the cost associated with this project.
And we know the costs.
Yes.
And they're not going to get any cheaper.
No.
The 75%, is that based on,
State law.
okay, state law, but that's, if I own two properties, do I get two votes?
No. You get a vote.
A vote.
Correct.
Okay. So the 75% is based on polling everybody. If we get the 75, they say we want in. Based on the offer you guys put on the table, whether it be a 5-year, 10-year, or 20-year financing window, et cetera.
Yes.
Okay.
Then we'd move forward. If you get 60%,
Then we decide if we want to force annex. Why would we force annex?
why would we?
Yes.
We would force annex because that's what our typical policy has been in the past. Every property in our growth area, in our city limits, has been brought into the City of Sioux Falls through one situation, rather, Orchard Heights, Hayward, Frolic, properties that are within our growth limits, they get city utilities, they are required to hook up. We don't have islands that are not being served by the city of Sioux Falls. It's also a process where, through forced annexation, state law supports that. They say these subdivisions, these areas receive goods and services from the community, they receive benefits from the community, they should be paying for the community services. Therefore, community should annex them into your community.
If I may, one last, and maybe you don't know the answer to this, but if they decide they want to fight forced annexation, what would their recourse be?
They would bring it to a vote of the public, the entire city of Sioux Falls, and the city of Sioux Falls would then decide whether or not they should be a part of city of Sioux Falls or not. Not just their neighborhood, but the entire community.
Okay. That's all the questions I have for Jeff. I have other discussion items, I guess.
Would have same, yes, Counselor Staggers.
Yeah, Jeff, exactly how many people are we talking about here in this area?
A population,
Yes.
150 to 200.
Okay.
I'm guessing, 75 homes, 2 people per home, 3 people per home.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you.
Yep.
Counselor Anderson?
Okay.
Junior?
Jeff, we've had multiple discussions on this. One of the things I think that the citizens in that area or the people in that area are waiting for is some type of proposal about the length of period that they're going to have to pay back the expenses that will be incurred by this development, correct?
Correct.
Okay. What scenarios are we looking at there? What type of payback periods have we put together since we've had these discussions?
We've looked at some options. I don't know for sure what we can legally look at for terms. Maybe someone is able to answer that. I don't know for sure what we have for terms. We've looked at options, but I don't know for sure what the available terms are.
So are we working with our legal at this point?
Yes.
To determine what terms we can at least discuss with the group out there? Because I think, to start the discussion, I feel that is the major point. As I'll say again every Wednesday at our little breakfast group that we have, the lady that serves us lives in that area.
Right.
And her biggest question has been to me each week is, have we decided to make some type of proposal to these guys so that they know what they're going to be voting on? And until we have something like that put together, I don't feel that they can, vote on something without having any knowledge of how it's going to work. I
I think we all agree on that. We need to come up with that actual correct length. I mean, is it a 10-year or 20-year term? Is it a 3% or 5%? And I don't know if we have that yet. Those are all solutions and ideas that we're looking at. I just honestly do not know if those are all in concrete yet, where you could go out and tell the neighbors. And when you do tell the neighbors, they're going to hear that and say, no, you said it was this.
Okay, and it would all be,
Just a minute, Kenny.
okay, thank you.
Tracy, I'm going to give you the floor.
Thank you.
Did you have something you wanted to add?
Well, to follow up on Councilor Anderson's questions, I think there's a spectrum of possibilities out there, and as a starting point, I think when the group first started looking at this, they looked at the special assessment process that the city has traditionally used for making some neighborhood improvements. And in the past, the city has really limited itself to 5-year repayments. And I know, given the context of this situation, the committee indicated last time that they'd like to explore some other possibilities. And there are extended repayment terms that are available under the law. From my perspective, as the city finance director, my recommendation would be to not go beyond 20 years. I think that could certainly be a workable possibility. That there are a lot of caveats with that, and depends on what the funding source is. Is it going to come out of the city's cash to fund these projects? Or are we going to go out and borrow the money? Some of it is in the form of grants. That also plays into it. So I think there are just so many moving parts to this. It's hard to know what kind of package to put together when we don't really know kind of what your limit or what your threshold is of acceptability. What I took away from the committee meeting last time were really two things. One, you wanted us to look at ways to come up with some scenarios that would, at the same time, minimize the risk to the city to move forward with this and improve the affordability to the property owners out there. And I think sometimes those are competing objectives. So I think you've got some possible scenarios out there where, I certainly think 20 years would be palatable. There was some discussion last time about interest rates. The current ordinance that the city council has is that there's a benchmark, and then we have an add-on factor to that interest rate, but that's based on a 5-year term. If we go out 20 years, again, I would advise tying that interest rate, if the city is to finance these projects, tying that interest rate to the length of the term. If we go out 10 years for a special assessment, for example, it would be advisable to have a different interest rate than you would for a 5-year term or a 20-year term. And so those are, again, some additional moving parts, I think, that have to be considered in this. But to Jeff's point earlier, until we have maybe a better feel for kind of what your gut check level is on some of this stuff, how much risk are you willing to have the city take on this, how long a repayment term, how much or to what extent should the city be the banker on this? Should we make the interest rate so favorable that we end up being the banker for all these projects? Is that an appropriate use of the city's dollars? That's something, kind of a policy question you folks have to decide.
If I may.
Councilor Anderson, continue.
Thank you, Tracy, because and please don't leave yet. That's what I was looking for, is that, let's start this discussion. Let's say how many years was the administration even looking at? And I think that's where we wanted to start that discussion. The 20 years, that sounds like a good, start of that. Now, if we did something like this, let's just say 20 years, is there a possibility that we could give those citizens options? Let's say some of them might want to pay it off in 10 years. Some may want to stay with that 5-year plan. Is that allowable? Is that something that, letting them choose which rate they want to pay, is that something that is allowable, or is that something you don't suggest?
I think the answer to that is it depends on what the funding mechanism is and what the repayment process will be. And we're looking at a couple of different alternatives. The one that's been discussed in the past is special assessing the property, where the cost of the improvements become a lien on the property, and then the property owner is billed along with the property taxes every year for a share of that with interest. There are other alternatives that we're looking at, and we're not certain that we can utilize other alternatives, but there are pros and cons to each of those, and so we're still kind of fleshing that out as well. But again, I think from my perspective, in order to minimize the risk to the city, it's important to the point you were discussing earlier on the voluntary versus a city-initiated annexation. I think that comes into play as well in terms of the level of risk or the degree of risk that the city is taking moving forward with this. I don't think there is a good funding scenario, frankly, under a forced annexation.
And if I may, thank you. And I agree with you there. I really don't like the ideal of any type of forced annexation. But the city is growing, and we're growing into these communities. And we want them to be part of the city. And I see we spend money in all different ways, through TIF and, different programs within the city to, increase our size. And I think this is just, another thing that we're going to probably have to do. The funding, we are the major banker or major player in this. And I think if we're going to ask these folks to come in and be citizens of the City of Sioux Falls, that we're going to probably have to, bank that action. So, and the risk to this, I guess, besides us being able to do the special assessments on property and those services, where else is the risk to the city?
Well, I think that's the single biggest risk that I would be concerned about, is that the ability to assess the property and then the ability to collect the assessments.
Okay.
Now, there are some other alternatives, as I mentioned, that we're exploring that would not involve a special assessment, that would involve a surcharge on the utility bills. And I think there are some advantages and disadvantages to that approach as well, if that turns out to be something that will work in this scenario. So I think, you know, there are still a number of unanswered questions, and I can appreciate people wanting to know as many of the facts as we can possibly provide them before they can make a decision. But it's a little bit of a catch-22, not knowing how far you folks are willing to go with making it affordable, taking risks from the public standpoint, and moving forward with it.
Yes. Counselor Karski.
Let's talk a little bit more about this here. It would appear to me that by having assessments on the property, that would give more flexibility to each one of the individual owners out there. I talked to one gentleman, visited about this subject, and said, you know, it's probably going to cost you about 50 grand. And he said, yeah, I've got it saved up. I'm ready. You know, he's got the cash to pay it. Not everybody's in that position, but it would give him the option of paying it up front. The next one might have a $10,000 assessment, and they're comfortable paying it over 10 or 5 years. And by having that assessment on their property, it allows us, the city, the recourse of being able to put a lien or judgment on that property. Am I right or wrong?
The special assessment does become a lien on the property.
Yes.
Yeah. And,
okay.
and the way those work, that to the extent, you know, if this moves forward and to the extent costs are assessed as a special assessment against the property owners do have the flexibility to prepay that. So in the case of the individual that has the cash sitting in the bank, he would not have to pay it off over 20 years. He could come in very early on and pay it off in full.
You know, this is just under a $4 million project from, if I got the numbers right, is that right? 41st Street from Sertoma to T. Ellis is a $10 million project. So just keeping it in perspective, I guess. So I mean, we talk about risk to the city, and when we have a lien on actual property, I don't maybe think that there's a lot of risk to the city there. I mean, maybe some time and interest rate risk, but I don't see where there's a real lot of financial risk to the city.
Well, one thing to keep in mind is that there is a process, and the property owners have certain rights under the special assessment process. And that, I think, is on the very front end is where, from my perspective, some of that risk may arise before we ever get a legal assessment and lien against the property. And that's, you know, that's probably more than what we need to go into here today. But, and I know this is kind of a changing environment in terms of the law as well. There have been a number of court cases in recent years that have dealt with special assessments. And so there's some concern that we don't necessarily know what the answer is if there is a challenge in place. You know, if there's 100%, if the 100% of the property owners out there are 100% behind this, and there's not one individual out there that's going to resist this, then you might be right. There might be very little risk. But all it takes is one sometimes to challenge something and derail the entire thing and really put the city at very significant risk if the property has already been annexed.
Councilor Stagers.
Yeah, I think one important thing we have to consider is that, okay, assuming there's 75 homes there, and the project is going to cost $3.5 million, dividing $3.5 million by 75 homes is going to be around $46,000. I mean, this is a huge, huge, huge amount of money. And then if we would say, okay, we'll allow 20 years or so for you to pay this off, well, that's well over $2,000 a year additional that they will be paying. To me, I think we ought to just keep in mind, this is a very, very expensive project for these people. $46,000
There's no
on
question.
average.
It's very expensive.
So, I don't know, to me, it seems like we got to figure out something else to get the cost down or something here.
I would, at some, yeah, probably thinking maybe I shouldn't say this, but I will anyway, because you got to, Counselor Staggers, I think you need to realize that these people have lived in a little island right there, not paying some of the things that other people have been paying all this time. So they've gotten some of the services of Sioux Falls by just being there, and some of the things that they have not paid for, such as this paved streets and different things like that, that they will be getting for this, that they've chosen to live in that area without those services. And now it just knowing someday that that was going to happen, you know, probably should have been saving up. And I'm not saying that's the way it happens, because I know it doesn't. But, and I understand where you're coming from there too. But it's one of those things that you got to plan for, because you know eventually it's going to happen.
Well, I guess I didn't know that it has to happen, but
Well,
we want to create that inevitability, I'm
and
sure,
we'd like to have
but
that, I
I don't
think,
think
as
it is.
As an addition, or that we take them in on their terms, kind of. Yeah.
If I could, Jeff, there's a delinquent sewer bill out there, 100,000, roughly?
Yes, roughly.
Okay.
Correct.
Do we know individually by property who owes that amount?
No, we do not.
Okay.
The way it works is the Sanitary Improvement District has one meter at the City of Sioux Falls city limits, and so the meter comes in, it's just like your meter, and they have to pay their bill, and there's a representative here today, and they get their bill every month and they have to pay it. But the property owners out there have to pay into the district, and that's how they have their money to make their monthly payment. If those property owners aren't paying in those 75, they don't have a way of keeping that record in the past to find out who's been keeping up and who hasn't been.
So there are-
Now they do. They've hired attorneys. They've been doing more enforcement, but historically they don't.
So they're into us for 100 grand there.
Yes.
I understand too that just as a courtesy to that subdivision, maybe courtesy is the wrong word, but for our convenience, because they did not have paved roads, and there's a temporary top coat on there. Is that correct? Some of those roads were paved at city expense?
We've been improving them. We've been maintaining them. Yes, Klein Avenue.
Klein Avenue?
Correct.
Okay. And eventually it'll have to be repaved again. That one coat we put down won't last real long. And that's not free to us, but it was free to the people in that subdivision.
It's a gravel road.
Right.
I'm sorry?
We're maintaining it. We don't pave it. We just maintain it.
I thought we put a layer of asphalt down on one of those.
It's still a gravel road, but we maintain it. We plow it, we grade it, we take care of it.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
To why we do maintain it, Jeff?
Can I speak to why we do maintain it? There is a subdivision to the south that's in city limits, and this subdivision is completely surrounded by the City of Sioux Falls. So the traveling public travels through this subdivision. So should the City of Sioux Falls be maintaining it, or shouldn't we be maintaining it? It's a philosophical decision. We stepped up and we're maintaining this gravel road. And now it's public, and so now the public understands that we're out there maintaining streets that aren't our jurisdiction.
Do we want to take public input on this today?
I think absolutely we do. In fact, I know that there are some people here that probably want to speak to this, so let's do that at this point.
Thanks for bringing up that road too, Dean. I would say
Very good.
about 80% of the traffic on that road is
City.
Sioux Falls citizens, so.
Mr. Samp, would you like to say something? I know that last time, I think we had talked to some of the people, and they had basically, or we had talked to one of the leaders of the association, indicated that they were pretty much in favor of the annexation if we could work out some financing for them.
If I may.
And so, yes, you may.
Share. Jeff, hadn't we figured out some of the preliminary cost per lot?
Yes.
I thought we had it figured out in the 20,000 plus, somewhere in that range.
That's correct. When we've made the presentations to the neighborhood in the past, we weren't doing a lineal foot, we were just doing a per lot cost around $25,000 per lot. So some property owners own more lots.
Right.
Okay, but when a property owner has a large lot, we were going to charge $25,000 per lot. And getting back to, again, the overriding cost-benefit issue here, it's really hard to determine that. But the citizens of Sioux Falls, I think, understand, and so council understands, when you go today to buy a single-family residential lot in the city of Sioux Falls, those lots are extremely expensive. I mean, I don't know if you can get one for $40,000 or $50,000 today, because they have water, storm sewer, curb, gutter, roads, sanitary sewer. They have all that, and before you even start to put a house on it, they're $40,000 to $50,000. So spending $25,000 to get a lot with all those improvements, that's their benefit. Then they can go, okay, now I can turn around and sell that lot. That's
Well done.
what they have.
Let's go back to some public input. No one would like to say anything? Thank you, sir.
Marlon Teason with Prairie Meadow Sanitary District, and I guess hopefully tonight I was kind of hoping we'd find out something on the interest and also the year's length of the loan and stuff. I guess I would really like to take something back to the members out there, but I need some information or what we're going to go or some kind of plan, because I don't want to have a meeting and tell them I don't know nothing. What's going on, but so I think we really need to move forward on a plan, and then present it to the people, and then maybe fine tune it afterwards. And I guess we talked a little bit about a surcharge. I guess I'd be for that, and hopefully, I guess for the people that want to pay it off, I think we could maybe set up a trust fund or something like that to put the money in there, and then city could draw out of that as they make their payments on these loans and bonds or whatever they have. And so I was kind of hoping that we can really move forward on this, because I think
Okay. Thank you.
we're not really under a time schedule, but I guess we are, because the longer we leave this go, it's not going to get any cheaper. And I know, like Kermit said something about it's a big debt to everybody, and I don't foresee in the next 5 years that a lot of homes are going to be built out there, and I don't think that a whole lot of things are going to change, and it's just going to, we'll be talking more money, and so hopefully, I guess we just got to pay it. Thank you.
Just a second. We might have some questions for you.
Definitely.
Councilor Anderson?
Mr. Teason, now are you with the water district or with the sewer district, or?
I'm treasurer on the board.
Okay. Let's talk about the sewer district here. You have a grant from the state and that to help start doing some of the sewer work, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and then let's say that the outstanding bill, which with our discussions there, they're saying $100,000, but I think there's should be some other discussions on how it got to be to that point. If that was waived and we did the sewer improvements, and then your sewer district would go away, correct? You wouldn't have that, you wouldn't have a need for that sewer district anymore.
No, I hopefully, well, the only reason I guess I kind of like to keep the board going yet is a little bit so we have a little input out there, so we have somebody to speak for the district. But yes, I would like to see it go away as soon as possible.
Okay.
Sir, could you speak into the microphones a little bit more? Just move forward a little bit. Thank you.
I guess where I'm leading to is that does the sewer district have any other money within their accounts that they would pony up for these sewer improvements?
Well, basically, we went to $100 a month now, the first of the year. But basically, we only got 3 bills. We pay the light bill, which is around $10. Our accounting fee for building and stuff is $3.50 a month. And basically, whatever is left that I take in, the city gets. And I've been sending, I think the last 2 times now, I sent $5,000.
Okay.
And
What points, if I may, what points do you feel are some of the points that we need to get settled here to give a proposal to your area? The amount of years and...
Amount of years and interest, I guess, because everything else I think is kind of pretty much cut and dried.
Yep, okay, thank you.
And
Yes, go ahead, Counselor Karski.
I don't know who can answer this, but does the council need to take any action to change the way we can be on the 5 years of 3.5% above the, I think it's treasury bond or whatever that, however we calculate that? Is that going to take action on behalf of the entire council? Director Turback, is that?
oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, that
Mr.
is set
Teason,
out
stay
in
handy.
ordinance, so it would, pardon me?
I was asking Mr. Teason to stay handy.
It is set out in ordinance, so if we're going to change that, how that interest rate is calculated, that would require an ordinance change approved by the full council.
Even if we were to do it as an assessment on the policy, on the property, would that be the same thing?
Yeah, that's the purpose of the ordinance, is to set the rate for special assessments. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Teason, let me ask you a question, if no one else has any more discussion at this point. I would like to know what your feeling is if you came to your association and voted whether or not to be annexed or to force us to annex you. How do you think they would vote?
I think the majority of them would vote for it. I don't know if we can get the high number that we're supposed to get. I think we got to get, what, 65 or 70 per
75.
members to vote, or, well, I think there's, what, 72 out there, so there again, I guess if I could come up with get a proposal or something, I guess I wouldn't mind going around with a petition and see how many signers I get, and I guess I'd do whatever it takes. But I guess I got to have something to tell the people what we're voting on. But
That was.
I would think we'd get pretty close, but maybe not.
Let me play a really bad scenario, which for us is bad, for Mr. Teason it's good. So Mr. Teason, if there was an opportunity that City Council passed an ordinance that you could do a 20-year term, the monthly payback would be about $200 a month. So if you would go back and talk to your property owners and do a 20-year term for $200 a month, plus they'd still have their monthly bills, which they're paying $140 a month now, they'd have $170 a month, plus the $200 a month, would you be able to get 75% of your property owners? So of the 75 that are out there, you're going to need to get, who's got the quick math, you're going to need to get
53 of them. 7 times 7 is.
okay, so you're going to get 54 of the 75 to sign on.
Yeah, I can see we're charging $100 a month now for the sewer, and I'm sure rural water, most everybody's paying $40 to $50 a month. So that's how we come up with $150 that they're paying. My understanding, if we go in the city, that we'd probably be looking at maybe $50 a month for sewer and water. So they would be saving $100 there that they could be putting towards their.
Mr. Schmidt, why would that be?
The monthly rate will stay the same. You're paying $140 on monthly rate right now. You'll be paying $170 on your monthly rate. So your monthly rate's going to be basically the same, but we're going to charge you another $200 a month to pay your capital costs.
Why would that be if they've got meters hooked up to their own houses then?
Because it's your monthly bill for what your water and sewer is going to be, but you got to pay now to put it, you just paid for your roads, your lights, your sidewalks, your curb and gutter, your what?
That's a $200.
Yep.
Now
Your
they pay their
170
regular monthly bills that would, he's saying would be less because they're not
Nope.
trying.
No, because your $170 is going to be your monthly bill to pay for your water and sewer rates. That's just the way. Again, we're throwing numbers out here in spec. It's just the way we kind of have it set up right now.
So if I'm using less water, I'm still going to pay the same amount as a guy who keeps his lawn looking spectacular down the road all summer?
No, it's the way that we have the financing set up. We have all these scenarios set up for special assessments and surcharge. We got a whole bunch of different costs set up, and the way we have it currently set up is it's going to be $170 a month and $200 a month, so it's going to be $370 a month.
Okay, I'm not,
The 170 would pay for that sewer work. The 200 would pay for your
no,
curb
the
and
200
gutter.
is the $3.5 million financed over, that's the way I understood it.
We'd have to sit down and show you each one of the scenarios, but we're going to do some in a monthly charge, and we're going to do some as a capital charge.
Then the 3.5 million will not be total.
It will be total, but it's going to be in two different scenarios. Some's going to be a monthly, and some's going to be a capital.
Then assuming that is the way it is, then if using Councilor Stager's situation, where he said $200 a month, $2,500 a year,
Right.
to pay for the money over, or the full 3.5 over that period, then the $200 a month should come down, because you're really not borrowing that amount. You're paying with, you're borrowing that amount, but you're paying it with through a different form. So the $200 a month would be less. Am I? Because it seems like we're double paying at that point.
No.
Okay, I'm gonna allow Councilor Enneman to say something.
Jim Entman, City Council. I look at this as, you know, if you kind of keep it simple, we know it's about, what, $3.2 million they were talking about along that line, right? So why not say, okay, give us two scenarios. Give us a 15-year and a 20-year payout for the total amount of money. Tell us what the interest rate is going to be, set the interest rate. Now, the city believes that there's a benefit, or it's our responsibility to take this area in. The citizens are going to receive benefits, and that they're going to have paved streets, city water, and sewer, okay? So that being said, set the interest rate and then say, okay, this is what it's going to cost you a year for 15 years, including the interest. This is what it's going to cost for 20 years. We, as a city, determine, do we do 15 or 20 years after talking to the citizens. Then, if they pay it off early, there should be no penalty for early payoff.
Right.
That's something I think that we need to accept the fact that there should not be a penalty on an assessment. But they are assessed the money. If they want to pay it off, borrow the money, pay it off in 1 year, let them. If they want it added to their tax rolls for the period of 15 or 20 years, let them. They're going to still get their billings on a monthly basis for everything, but in a way, it's keeping it simple. Now, if that's what we want to do as a council, let's figure out how to get it done, and we'll ask the city finance director to get it figured out along with Mr. Cotter and his team.
Yes.
I agree completely with you, Jim. I think it's at the point, the people out there are eager to get this behind them. It's been discussed and rediscussed and discussed it some more. So I think we need to probably let our planning department go with a plan to them, and it's up to us here, I think at a committee level, to give them that guidance to say, take this plan back. I know it's going to take complete council action to approve the money through an appropriations process or through changing our ordinance. But we got to give these people the ability to vote up or down, thumbs up or thumbs down on it, and then let's take it from there. But until that happens, and we give them, I think, the most favorable terms. 20 years at our current, give them the option of paying it off, but let's let our planning department take something to the table. We can talk about $170 or $200, but that's not our choice. That's their choice to make.
Anything over here?
Yeah, I'm glad we're back on track. I agree there too. 15, 20 years and the different type of rates. If you're looking for direction, I agree with you also, Councilman Karski, because we need to get this taken care of. People are asking, they want to know, they want to move forward. This also is going to set the bar for future annexations that we do too, because this is going to take council action. So as we look at forward to, as you gave us our presentation, I think there's 4 or 5 more areas within the city that, you know, we're looking at annexing. This will help them understand what we're trying to do.
Councilor Chris.
One more thing, if I may. I think it's an all-in type of thing. Lights, sidewalks, curb and gutter, streets, water, sewer. It's not a a la carte menu, well, we don't want lights, or we don't want a sidewalk here, or we don't need curb and gutter there. I think if this is going to be annexed into the city, it needs to look like the rest of the city.
Yes,
And I
Councilor
guess
Staggers.
that's maybe something I disagree a little bit with, because we have annexed other parts of the city, and like Old Orchard Heights. They got a good deal, and I think these people should be entitled to having a good deal too. So, like at Old Orchard Heights, we don't have sidewalks. Maybe these people don't want sidewalks, or maybe they want sidewalks. But this to me seems like we could reduce the cost for these people. And I think that's what we ought to be striving for too. We can continue talking about $3.5 million, and maybe they want to go that way, but maybe they want to go a cheaper route too.
Okay, here's what I'd like to suggest. We'd like to ask Finance and Planning to get together with the people from the development, from Prairie Meadows, and develop a plan that they can come back and present to us, that not only looks for 15 and 20-year discussion, or 20-year interest, or spread out, and an interest rate that may be different for both of those scenarios because of current interest rates tied to something that would be good. And we'd like to have something done so that we can get a feel for the Prairie Meadows Association before our next meeting. And does that sound about reasonable, what we've been talking about?
I'm okay with that. I guess, I don't know if it's going to take a vote on our part to do that.
It's going to take a vote here and then up.
Okay.
The other thing I'd like to have you look at as part of that is what changes need to be made to our ordinances so that we can implement that and get started with it, assuming that we can agree on something at our next meeting. Are there any questions about what we want to do and what we need for next meeting? Councilor Anderson.
I don't think it's a question, but I do agree with you. 15, 20 years, rates for each. And I do think that it's just time for the administration to take that over and bring us a proposal at the next meeting.
And if I could, just one more time, going back to the kind of the all-inclusive process, two things on that. One is we're going to try to give them our sweetest deal that we can as far as financing goes, terms, length, et cetera. I'd rather go to them and say this is an all-in type of deal, and if they say, you know, it would be great if it wasn't all-in, then I'll let them come back to us. But I think we really need to go to them first and say we're going to make our sweetest offer, but we want it to look like the rest of the community. And if they come back to us and say we like everything, but we don't want sidewalks, well, then we can have that discussion.
Yeah.
But I think we need to go in for everything to begin with, and then we can negotiate the rest later.
I would agree with you. Now, if I can editorialize just a little bit, I think you guys have heard right now that as this committee, we're willing to take on some of that risk that you've talked to us about. That was one of your questions. We are definitely, at this point, saying that we are willing to look at the risk and take that on as a city. And so don't worry about that end of it unless you can mitigate most of it in one way or another, most or all of it in one way or another. Okay? Fair enough? Okay. Let's move on to our second agenda item.
Pardon me?
Yes.
Mr. Rolfing. One, did you want to vote on that last item? And if so, we need a motion and a second, and to clearly state your motion, please.
I would make the motion that we give direction to our planning commission to put together an offer based on a maximum of a 20-year financing to the Prairie Meadows subdivision, and all-inclusive of the complete process of making that look like the rest of our city, the sanitary sewer, the water, the lights, the sidewalks, et cetera.
Second.
Second. Yes, and include the interest rates in that, too.
I'll second that again.
I'll second that again, okay. Any discussion? Good, all in favor? Aye?
Aye.
All opposed?
No.
Motion carries 3-1. Okay, we'll move on to our second area. Thank you, everyone, for being here. We appreciate it. TIF ordinance. I think Darren is here, or Brent? Oh, I guess.
Good afternoon. I got caught up in the tidal wave of the folks leaving after the last item there. So, Darren Smith, Director of Community Development of the City of Sioux Falls, and Brent O'Neill, our Economic Development Manager, is here as well. And Brent has, some slides we're going to put up there. So we are here by request to provide an update on implementation of the new tax increment financing ordinance that the council overwhelmingly approved in October, I believe. So it's been about 3 months. And I wanted to start there, if I could, just briefly. This is the entirety of the ordinance as it looks now, as approved. And so you can see the big piece of that really was the application, putting a formal application in place, requesting the establishment of a tax incremental district, et cetera, on a form to be prepared by the department. And we're going to share with you the working draft that we have today of that application we feel good about. And then the other big piece was really the putting a structure in place to recover costs that we incur as part of the process and how we get reimbursed for that. So again, the application fee of $2,500 with an application, payment processing and administration fees. These are really to process the twice annual payments when the developer or the owner in a TIF district pays their property taxes, and that makes its way through the system, and those dollars are flagged and returned to the city for TIF reimbursement. That's what that is there for with our finance department. They take care of that. And then any other direct costs incurred, whether it's legal or financial analysis or otherwise, we have the ability to recover those costs that we incur up front as opposed to never, or as opposed to waiting later until the TIF district's approved and that increment starts coming in. Sometimes that can be 2 to 3 years. So that is the ordinance. Then very briefly, what I wanted to touch on, these are, with a few minor modifications, the following 3 slides are exactly the same slides that we consistently showed throughout the process, the last half, really, of 2013 as we were in front of the City Council and Land Use Committee and so forth, actually several times. We want you to know that the ordinance, again, really was the product at the end of the day of several meetings and outreach on our part, feedback from others in the community. It was 2 years ago already this month that we had a full work session with the City Council to discuss tax increment financing in a lot of different ways. We had individual meetings with City Council members on how we could look at this TIF process and make it better. Same thing with Planning Commission members. We met with the Sioux Falls School District official. We had invited school board members to meet, and they declined. And we met because they're very comfortable with the process to date. But we did meet with the finance director for the school district. We met with several of the county commissioners and invited each of them to meet with us. Met with as many in the development community as we could locally to get their input and feedback and opinions. Met with local legal professionals who help us with the TIF process, and then of course our own staff research. The impetus really was trying to proactively review the TIF process again. How could we make it better? How could it be improved? And then clearly, we hear things in the community or from different elected officials or planning commission members or whatever. They're very forthcoming with their opinions, and we heard different comments and remarks made about this process. And so again, we wanted to be responsive to that. So one of the big wins we feel with not only the new ordinance, but really the new approach we're taking is with communication, enhanced communication. So it does provide advance notification to elected officials, in particular the city council members, school board officials, school board members and county commissioners. We will ensure that material on TIF or tax increment financing in Sioux Falls is available. We're going to accomplish that through our website with a Q&A and a frequently asked questions, those types of things. that we're working on. And then it does actually provide 2 additional opportunities for review that have not taken place historically. For example, we will now commit to having 2 planning commission meetings. That was a major request from the planning commission. They really wanted something more than before it was being presented to them and then immediately asked for them to take action. And we thought that was a more than fair request. So we will go to them and make a presentation on the proposed TIF district and the project at least 1 month in advance of asking them to take action. And then 2 city council meetings. So currently you have approved, and historically you have approved TIF districts by resolution. So 1 city council meeting and you take action. What we're committing to is, again, to enhance the communication. So I'm not going to suggest necessarily it would have to be a formal city council meeting a week or a month before that we would come to you. We want to work with you folks on that. It can be a city council meeting if you wish, and a non-action item. It could be an informational meeting. That's really what it is. It would be for informational purposes only. You would not be asked to take action until a later date. Or it could be this committee. It's really whatever the wishes of the council are to accomplish that. And then finally, the application and the cost recovery. So again, what we did identify in the ordinance is that we would have a formal application, which we've never had before, to give some formality to the structure. The application, among many other things, and we'll show you that in just a minute, will include project summary, financial projections, timelines for completion, ownership of project, and again, several other things. Then the TIF costs, again, $2,500 with the application fee, $250 per payment or disbursement, and then a structure to recover the other costs that we incur. So at this time, what we'd like to do is show you the application we have that we've developed. And again, just starting top to bottom, and I won't spend a lot of time on this. It's pretty straightforward. It's 1 page, as we had hoped. You start at the top with the basics, the applying entity, authorized representative, and then it moves through when would you expect the project to start, when would you expect the project to be completed, talk about different phases of the project if that's applicable, the estimated cost, what TIF are you requesting, what amount, a narrative of the project, and then the bottom half here, clearly the information provided to us will be much more than just this 1 page summary. Each of these boxes will need to be checked. Again, proposed a map of the proposed boundaries to approve those boundaries. That's one of the formal action items. Listing of what they feel are the proposed TIF eligible public improvements, and then that's something obviously we talk to them about and work through and negotiate in some cases. Provide a description of the ownership structure, list the principal owners and officers, a rendering of the project. There's some of the finances would be sources and uses, a pro forma if applicable. What the expected, what's the property tax revenue generated today? What is the expected new amount? Because of course that's how we determine the increment that would be available potentially for those TIF eligible expenses. And so again, a lot of it is pretty straightforward. And then of course the last box, other relevant information is may be requested. So that's the catch-all. If there is something we need or want that is not part of one of the boxes up above, then we have the ability, of course, to request that. And then just below that, in that little shaded area, one thing I wanted to mention that we do plan to add is we'll put some language in there that identifies what the application fee amount is, and just that language that we reserve the right to recover all direct expenses incurred as part of the analysis for this application and so forth and so on. So we'll add that. People who are better than we are at doing the formatting and all that stuff, we put in that request with them to do that. But other than that, we feel very good about the application document. We feel good about the process going forward and what we've done to give it structure. We're anxious to utilize it. We do expect a TIF application project to come in soon. And that was part of the impetus, again, with the timing. As we had mentioned at that time, it was something we anticipated even then a few months ago, and we do expect that to take place. So we're pleased to have this in place moving forward, and to communicate more often, more effectively, and so forth, particularly with the Planning Commission, City Council, and others. So with that again is an overview of the TIF ordinance as it was approved and adopted, and the application that we have at this time.
Thank you, Darren. Questions from the committee? Yes. Councilor Staggers.
Yeah, Darren,
Yes.
I guess I should have probably thought of this earlier, but $250 to write a check?
Well,
How
it's
do we
more
come
than
up with
that.
200?
Yeah, it's more than that. We are actually working right now to put a process in place. I think you folks are aware that there's new finance software and a lot of new different software packages being put in place to help the city manage the our dollars and different processes we have. Please understand that when a TIF district is approved, you folks and others move on and go on to new business, but the city, as far as the administration and the finance department in particular, they have to manage that process and make sure those payments are made on time and to the right entity or institution, finance institution, if that's the case, multiple times a year. And we want to make sure that we're recovering the costs appropriately to do that. And going forward, we'll have a more formal process in place, checks and balances to make sure it's done, because those payments obviously in some cases are sizable and they're very important for the projects. And these TIF districts that have been approved in recent years to some extent are getting more complicated. Some of them want payments to go in multiple directions. And that, I think, very candidly, is the next thing we're going to look at as a way to continue to improve the process, is to streamline that a bit. And if the owner of the TIF district, so to speak, wants payments or needs them to go to multiple, financial institutions or LLCs or whatever the case may be, I think we're going to change the process to make that incumbent upon them and make it their responsibility. But there's staff time involved in this, and of course the responsibility to make sure it's done right and done on time.
Okay, so theoretically then it could actually be thousands of dollars a year for writing checks.
Well, it would be $250 per payment.
Yes.
That they would be asked to pay to cover the costs of our finance department, the software to manage that, and so forth. And again, please understand, as we went through this process and had several conversations with all those groups I mentioned, of course that includes the development community and many of the local and regional developers, and we explained to them the costs that we incur and wanting to get a handle on that and what's fair for taxpayers. We work for taxpayers and administering these for these projects and making sure that we're being fair. And I feel pretty comfortable and confident in saying they had absolutely no problem with this level of fees.
So once again, it could be thousands of dollars, depending on how many checks, of course, are written and things like that.
Unlikely, but potentially, okay. Yes.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councilor Anderson.
So I think at the top of this, we were talking about authority and purpose, South Dakota codified law, this would be chapter 11 through 9.
Oh, in the ordinance?
Yes.
Yes.
Now, is that where the state lists the individual items that can be approved for TIF?
Yes. SDCL, South Dakota Codified Law, Chapter 11-9, that is where tax increment financing is, the authority for that for local government entities is given. Now, I don't know, Brent, to say how specific it really gets in 11-9 as far as those expenses.
I mean, I can
Yeah.
speak up real quick. And I don't have the section with me, but it does give a list of, I think, 8 different categories, and they're somewhat broad. I mean, capital costs is one of those categories, and that can mean several different things, but there's things like financing costs, et cetera, in that list of 8.
That'd be something I'd like to discuss with you further outside of this
Absolutely.
meeting, because that's something that does concern me. Throughout my time on the council, I voted for several different TIFs. Haven't been surprised until just recently when we brought up the TIF for the facade. And I guess my concern there is that I don't really favor using TIFs for projects that we already have city funding for.
Yeah, I understand.
So that would be something I would like to discuss further with you and
Absolutely.
your agency.
You bet.
Thank you.
You want to know what these are?
Not at this time. I think we can discuss that, and that discussion
Right.
can be carried on.
I would just let you know that I
Sure.
could look it up.
That's good, yeah. Thank you.
I have a couple things. In the application, Brent, we had talked about a couple of things that we had looked at. I had suggested, I think, that on the required submittal material that you add the $2,500 check.
Yes.
So that they know exactly who they got to write it to,
Yes.
and they do have to submit a check with it. And then the other one was, I was thinking about a scenario that you did. Let's see if I can get this put together correctly. Writing multiple checks to the
Yeah.
different debtors, if you will, or
Yep.
the lenders. I wonder if that needs to be rethought from the standpoint, if we send a check directly to the developer, shall we say, whoever is in charge. Not that this would ever happen, but could it happen that they would decide, well, maybe I won't pay the debtors this time, I'll just put that in my pocket to cover payroll instead.
Yeah.
And if 2007 happened, 9 happened again.
Yeah.
So that might be a safeguard that we continue to do, to make the checks directly to the bank so that we know that they're getting their money, rather than, not saying that would ever happen. Don't think it ever would, but just in case, might be something to think through a little bit.
Well, it's a great point. Now, I would say, keep in mind, these are expenses that they are incurring in some way, shape, or form and being reimbursed. So it's not an expense that is a liability in any way for the city or the responsibility of the city. And Councilor Roving, I would say, the banks, for the most part, are a step or two ahead of you on that, and that's what we're seeing more of with these projects. And so I think years ago, it was probably a little more simple and straightforward, where the check went to the developer or the entity, the owner. And we're seeing less and less of that. They're being directed to the financial institution, or in some cases, institutions. So I think that is a requirement that they are making.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's, okay.
Yeah. To ensure that that doesn't happen, the scenario, the hypothetical scenario you laid out doesn't happen.
Councilor Anderson, did you have something else?
One other thing on the application, provide description of project ownership structure and list principal owners and officers.
Yep.
Is that something new on this form, or?
Well, keep in mind, we've never had an application form before, and that was really one of the many things we wanted to do, is give a formal structure. When you talk about the types of projects we work on, the dollar amounts, we needed a formal structure of some kind, and so we have that in place. Not going to suggest this is the end-all, be-all. It's perfect. It'll continue to be improved, I think, as we move forward. We'll find things, but never been on an application before because we didn't have one, but I would say it's still a very similar approach to what we've taken in the past, where those are the types of things we've always inquired about and found out, of course.
I know you've had discussions with Councilman Jamison. Is this some of the result of those discussions then, or is this the area that he wanted to review as far as the application process?
Well, I can't speak for him if this satisfies him, and so he might want to offer his opinion on that. I would just say that this was an item that we would have had, we anticipated having on the application anyway. This is something that we've been collecting, really, I guess in the 3.5 years I've been here, and involved with involved with these TIF districts. That's just standard operating procedure. So it's not a change from past practice. It really isn't. It's just on a formal application now.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yes. Yeah, on our agenda here, it talks about Craig Jameson is also expected to discuss his proposal. Are we
I
going to
was just going to open it up to public
Okay.
discussion, and that would be the appropriate place.
Okay.
Is there anyone who would like to speak to this presentation? Councilor Jameson?
Here we go, Kenny.
So do we have two things here?
Two things, yes.
Oh, he's getting complicated, huh?
This is very complicated. Oh, you got the Omaha one?
Why don't you guys share?
Yeah, we'll share.
Okay. Here's another one.
Take that one. We got enough of
We
them?
should have enough.
Okay, I've only got
Yeah.
3.
I'll look.
Oh,
Yeah, he's got enough of one and not of the other. So,
I have one more.
of the Omaha?
No, I do.
Yeah, you need the Omaha. There you go. This is the only one I need to
this
see
is
here.
very complicated.
Continue, Counselor.
Just for the record, Greg Jamison, and as well, there were 8 sheets of paper that I handed to you, so I hope that wasn't too hard. But as far as being satisfied, I think that's all part of this discussion is this whole TIF discussion has been evolving. As Darren had mentioned, over the years, there's been slight revision changes. We've all seen places where we think it could be, or we all thought it could be improved in some way or another. But what I was bringing forward and what happened and started back in October when this really came about, when Darren had proposed some changes to the ordinance, charging those fees, that's when this came about, was a culmination of other discussions about TIFs from over the years, and certainly being here 6 years, we've seen our share of TIFs. But this amendment is a part of the ordinance. The application process, the application sheet that Darren just reviewed is really an internal document for them to review. So while it's great, this revision, this amendment is really basic, and it's got 2 parts to it, but it's all about open government. At the end of the day, that's all it is about. I'm not trying to reinvent the TIF in any way, expand its use or minimize its use. It's about open government and just basic transparency and disclosures about the TIF process. So there's 2 pieces here really, and it's about identifying all the people who are involved in the investments. What they call it a financial disclosure statement. And that's just a part of the application for the TIF. Any investor is required to be listed. So you can't just ask for a TIF as the ABC LLC company. You have to disclose who those people are. The other part is the notification of changes within that structure. The idea is to give the city notice that that investment structure, that financial disclosure statements have changed. And the reason for that is to avoid any appearance or parts of anybody who may have been a part of approving the TIF, only to come in later and say, okay, now I want a piece of the action. Just because it gets notified essentially to the city, is going to prevent anybody from doing that. It's just a safeguard. It's what's in place currently in Rapid, a little separately, a little differently in this, but in essence, this language comes from Rapid City. And so, I mean, the idea here is a continuing conversation about how the TIF ordinance has evolved over the years. What we've heard and listened to from others in the past about TIFs, comments that I'm sure all of you have heard that only a select few in this community are allowed TIFs. We know that is not the case. A financial disclosure statement will prove that, because it will be in a document in a place in a file in a drawer in Darren's office or somebody's office that proves that others are involved in these TIFs. It isn't a select few, and it isn't for just only a few. This disclosure statement just makes it open to the public. Now, when we approve a TIF, we're not going to be looking at this list to determine if we like these people or not, or based on who they are, whether they'll get the TIF. Our decision comes from the merits of the project, and that's it. We wouldn't even probably see this list. Maybe the city attorney would see it, maybe somebody else. It's not a part of our discussion. It's really meant just to be a part of the application process to provide fair, open government. Nothing else. In all fairness, what we've talked about and heard in the past that, what happens when you try to hide something? It's not good for us. Open government helps us. Just like in that process we did for approving all the city contracts, we made that a part of our consent agenda. We were told, I think at one time, that we weren't allowed to do that. It was against the law for us to do that. But that added tremendous transparency to what we do and how we spend the public's money. And that builds trust. This disclosure, this amendment, would add trust to the process of our approval of TIFs. So we can squelch out those rumors that TIFs are only for a select few. TIFs are handed out willy-nilly. There's no hidden agenda. There's no deals behind closed doors. We all know how easy that would be if we could work behind closed doors. I just think that the evolution has come, the time has come, the conversation continues as we move along and we use TIFs more and more and we all become more comfortable with them. There's slight changes that can happen. And the other part of this I wanted to share before I forget is that imagine you've got an investor in our community who's done a project on this side of town, but for some reason, one reason or another, he owes the city hundreds of thousands of dollars because he failed to do something. He hasn't cut the grass there for years or whatever. You know what I mean? So he owes the city hundreds of thousands of dollars, but then over here the developer is asking for a $1.5 million TIF. But we wouldn't know that. Nobody would know that. But if a financial disclosure statement is provided, our fiduciary responsibilities for the city are kept because we're protecting and promoting the safeguard of the city. So I think it just behooves us on the behalf of protecting our own assets that we provide or require a financial disclosure be provided so that we don't hand out a $1.5 million TIF to somebody who still owes the city $200,000 and we can't deal with them because they won't pay us. This helps provide safeguards to prevent that from happening. Lots of things I could go on to, but I'd certainly answer any questions that you have or provide further information if you need it.
Yes, Councilor Staggers.
Yeah, Greg, I was kind of surprised when you said that we would not know who the people are that are part of this TIF when we vote and discuss it and things like that.
Right.
Why wouldn't we? Why shouldn't we know?
Well,
If we want to know. If we don't want to know, that's different. But if we want to know, why shouldn't we know?
Well, I would say that absolutely you have the prerogative to know. It's just, in my opinion, general overstatement that in our decision-making of whether the TIF is viable or not or necessary is only based on the merits of the proposal, not on the individual who is, the financial worthiness of the individual and their ability to, go through with the project is something else on another level. But, I was just saying from my perspective, it wouldn't matter who the people are.
Thank you.
Councilor Karski.
And I appreciate that. From your perspective, that's true, but that's not to say future counselors or individuals are going to pick apart that list and say, why are they given X contractor or ex-developer, a TIF, they've got plenty of money. I guess I'm still, like your first comment, a TIF should be based on its merits, not on who is proposing it, who the individual investors are. We've got 8 counselors up here, 8 votes to decide, is this a project that's worthy of a TIF because it's going to make our community better. We've got a blighted area of town. And by granting this TIF, it's going to make us better, make our community better, remove the blight, and the whole community's better off. I'm still really having a hard time with seeing the benefit of knowing or having that as a public record. I'm not talking about this developer. We're going to know who the developer is or who the project manager is, what the name of the corporation is, who's submitting the application. But to know, I mean, if it's a Costco $30 million project, I mean, do we have to know if we have another $30 million project and we have a bunch of $50,000 investors, we got to know every $10,000, every $50,000, every $100,000 that somebody put into it, and where that makes it a better process, I'm confused.
Oh, well, that's fine. I mean, it isn't as simple as it might appear. There are a lot of things at play here. There are challenges of publicly traded corporations involved in a TIF, local developers who have a multitude of investors who aren't known to anybody. They call them syndicates. And nobody from one development company wants the other developer to know who those investors are because they might come and attach on them and try to get them to do another project. And now cats and dogs are, it just gets crazy. But it comes down to some basic principles of government in my mind, because it gets complicated. And I can tell you as a candidate, it's very complicated. From what I'm doing here today is very complicated as a candidate. But I'm here. The basic principles of what we do as a council are pretty simple. Serving the public. What's in the best interest of the public? Knowing who is applying for a city provided program that is administered by the city, knowing who those applicants, knowing who those people are, seems very basic to me. So, where you get it all figured out is another point, but that basic principle shouldn't be overlooked with concerns of developers who are not happy with what you've proposed. That basic principle of open government is pretty simple. Everything good will flow from that, I can guarantee you. I did hand out another sheet there, but I think that's for your consideration.
Before we go there, Greg, I'd like to ask you about the application that was presented.
Sure.
Do you think, whether or not we move forward with your amendment, do you think it's a good step with this application, and especially the one line that asks for officers and investors in the project?
Right, I think your question before was whether I was satisfied or not. It's kind of an odd word, but I like it. No, I think it's very good. Administratively, they needed a document like that to follow because previous there wasn't one. So they needed some formality to the procedure, and I think it's great. They need that. But the only issue with that statement that you referred to about the listing those people, ownership structure, and list of principal owners and officers, that's just for them to kind of know who they're working with. It isn't the disclosure that I'm referring to because it's an administratively document that they're working with. It isn't a part of the ordinance. So if somebody could put ABC LLC by Kenny Anderson, and they know they're working with Kenny Anderson, and they're not going to go and require in fact, it doesn't require them or force you, if you were such involved, that you wouldn't have to list who all those other people are. So it's a great step. It's a part of the process. They needed it. It's the evolving part of this whole discussion. So I think it's fine in that effect.
Thank you.
Well, just as a side note, if you could, as we discussed this last October, in kind of a flurry of a discussion during a council meeting, we determined then that there's a lot more to this, and we didn't need to rush into it at that time. But it's clear how this conversation has evolved and keeps moving, and other new things kind of come to light about what we're doing and what's required, and even how the process works. So I think that continuing that evolution is important.
Go ahead, Counselor.
Did you want to speak to the other paper that you handed us?
Well, we have, I guess I could, so you understand, Rapid City uses this language currently today. Chicago uses this language today. Just as a side note, in Chicago, even if you're making a zoning change request, you have to include the financial disclosure statement on that.
But, Councilor Jameson, to that statement, Rapid City doesn't have it in ordinance, though. They just have it as part of their application, correct?
This part would be, right, because we don't have that as a part of our ordinance, as I understand it. We don't have an application in our ordinance.
Okay. But is Rapid City's requirement part of their ordinance, or is their application part of their ordinance?
If I get the language right, I don't want to be scolded here.
It's on their application,
It's on their application, not in their ordinance.
Not in ordinance. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So the other page that you've got, I'm not sure, I think I get one here, but it refers to the Omaha Charter, which has a language in it regarding no elected official or officer or employee of the city. Is that the one you have?
Yes.
Yeah. And that we just found as part of our research when we were doing the this TIF investigation. And I think during our last discussion in October, that's one of the things that came up. Whether or not, I'm not sure who said it, but it was brought up about whether just public elected officials should be the ones to disclose whether they are or not, or be prohibited. So I just wanted to find some language that was used locally or nearby in Omaha of that. So that's really maybe a part of your discussion if you want to have it, but I just thought it'd be good to provide it to you.
Thank you.
Other questions from this group? I'm going to open this up to the general public here. If you have some comments or anything you'd like to make, we'd like to hear them at this point. Okay, thank you. Discussion. Do I hear a motion then?
I'm going to make a motion that we forward the amendment to the city council for further discussion. I feel that it's something that I think would be a better discussion point for the entire city council than just our committee. I'm not sure if it's perfect in the way that it's stated, but that would be the time for us to do any amendments to it.
I'll second the motion, just, even though I'm against it, just based on the premise I think that the entire council should have the ability to address it.
Any discussion on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. Okay, we've successfully passed that one on to the whole council. Any other open discussion for our committee?
Do we want to discuss this, the second form that was given to us to the Omaha?
We sure could.
Ordinance?
I looked at it. This isn't an ordinance. It's part of their charter, and I don't think it would address a tax increment finance district. This specifically addresses contracts. And, I don't see where it's an issue as part of the TIF discussion.
You're saying it might be something to bring to the Charter Revision Committee?
The Charter Revision Committee wants to take that one on. That's up to them.
I would tend to agree with you. And we'll maybe pass it on as a little side note to them.
But also,
Yes, Councilor
if
Staggers.
I might mention here, it also has down TIF guidelines / application. And it says, an employee of the City of Omaha cannot invest, participate, or take a personal interest in a redevelopment project that is funded through TIF. So that part definitely deals with what we've been talking about.
Okay, thank you. Okay, any other open discussion? We will look forward to, at the very least next time, having some information on the Prairie Meadows situation, some options that hopefully they have gotten through to the members of the Prairie Meadows Subdivision Association, so that we can have a little indication of whether or not they are in favor, like what they see, don't like what they see, so we can continue that situation, but hopefully no farther than next time. And without any further business, I will adjourn this meeting. Thank you all for attending.